There's been some absolutely horrific flooding in Louisiana recently. 13 people are dead. Tens of thousands of houses are ruined. People's lives have just been upended and destroyed. And they say that this is the worst natural disaster in the U.S. since Hurricane Katrina. So this is really, really, really serious. And it's just not getting as much coverage because it's not, it doesn't have the initial shock that a hurricane would have because it's flooding. So it's really disastrous. And Bill Nye went on CNN here to talk about it. Let's see what he had to say.
We know what they're dealing with down there. We see it time and again. Reporters such as myself have stood in those waters and watched these people rebuild. Can anything be done?
Well, for us, on my side of this is a result of climate change. It's
right.
Only going to get worse.
Right. We hear this all the time. But isn't there not just about temperature, not just about erosion and water, but the basic structure of this place, how New Orleans, from the weight of development and how it's been built up, the levees is sinking. That when you're there, you stand on the ground and you look up at ships going past you in the Mississippi.
So I don't have the answer to this, except it's going to get worse. Almost certainly will get worse. Everybody, as the ocean gets warmer, which it is getting, it expands. Water gets, the molecules spread apart. And then as the sea surface is warmer, more water evaporates. And so it's very reasonable that these storms are connected to these big effects. So what will probably happen is people will move. Mm-hmm. Bunch of civil engineers who have done an analysis that you could power the United States, you could power most of the world renewably if you just decided to do it right now. Mm-hmm. You could. There's enough wind and solar resources, a little bit of tidal, some geothermal, to run the whole place. And then you would not, the previous story is just heartbreaking. You would not need to have a military on the other side of the world protecting oil fields. People would not be as motivated to set oil fields on fire if we had renewable electricity here.
A big issue that we see
in the first world, or the West.
We see hanging it over lots of parts of life. Let's see what happens coming out of this.
Here at CNN, you have essentially a climate change denier meteorologist, and knock yourselves out. But this is a big problem, and it's not going to go away.
A bigger conversation for another day. Bill Nye, appreciate it.
You're criticizing us? Gotta go. Thanks for coming, Bill Nye. Appreciate it. That's so sad. So he makes some great points there. The wars in the Middle East point is always really interesting because he's saying you wouldn't need this Western presence in the Middle East to the extent we have it if we were totally using renewable technology, green technology. And he even goes on to say, dude, we can switch to it right now. I didn't even know that. They're saying, yeah, if you just put the effort forward. But I mean, I guess it makes sense because what's holding us back? The oil industry lobbyists. The fact that, the oil industry has all this money and they spend a lot of money lobbying governments to try to make sure we don't get off the oil because then they go out of business and they don't want that. Yeah, but the downside of you staying in business is we continue to destroy the planet, climate change gets worse, and we march down this road to Armageddon. I don't want to overstate it here, but that's basically what's happening. So he's pointing out, dude, we can go to renewable right now. We just have to, muster up the will to do it, and I would argue get the money out of politics to allow us to do it. And perhaps the overarching point for this all is, he says, this is climate change, so let's acknowledge that. But furthermore, stop debating it. Here on CNN, you have essentially a climate-denying meteorologist, and they do have these debates over it all the time. And he's like, come on, man. He's calling out CNN to CNN's face. You got to wake up here, and you got to grow up, and you got to do the right thing and do your job. And the problem is, as we've discussed before, CNN has the wrong view of what journalism is. In their mind, they think neutrality is the way to go. Because what is neutrality? Neutrality means you're super balanced, and you're so balanced to the point of almost forcing balance on the situation, where everything is 50-50. Whatever the Democrats say, I'm going to tell you what they say. Whatever the Republicans say, I'm going to tell you what they say. We're going to look at every side of everything. Now, people might think, well, that seems like a fair and good way to approach these things. But hold on now. What about when reality is not indeed 50-50? What about when it's 100% one side is right and the other side is wrong? What about that? Well, then it's hard for them to come out and say they're right, they're wrong, because they've already bought into this narrative of equivalence is always the way to go. But sometimes you have a false equivalence. This is one of them. Did you know that Bill Nye debated Marsha Blackburn recently? Marsha Blackburn, a Republican congresswoman. They had a debate about whether or not climate change is real. So Bill Nye, the science guy, versus know-nothing Marsha Blackburn, who's taking money from big oil, and they go back and forth as to whether or not the climate change is real. You're doing a disservice to journalism. That's a slap in the face to journalism there. You want to know why? Because you're being neutral instead of being objective. Objective means you tell the truth no matter what. Neutral means I'm always going to call it 50-50. Well, you should marry yourself to objectivity and not neutrality, and then you would be sounding the alarms. People say, oh my God, you're doing scare tactics. Sometimes scare tactics are necessary when the thing in question is scary. I love how people use terms they don't even understand what they're saying. Like, oh, scare tactics. Yeah, some things are scary. So therefore, in those instances, scare tactics are merited. In fact, that's the only accurate and objective way to cover certain things. Climate change is one of them. The coverage during fucking Nazi Germany taking over swaths of Europe. You should have used scare tactics because it's fucking scary. Call me crazy. So, Bill Nye wrecked shit and ran shit in there, and they gotta take his advice, man, and they gotta stop doing this bullshit false equivalence, and they have to really cover climate change seriously, and no more hedging, no more any of that stuff. All the evidence and the data is in one direction. You gotta talk about it endlessly, raise the public consciousness and awareness, and then put enough pressure on the government to change things.